best way to bring folks together is to give them a real good enemy.
This wicked witch.
Don't be afraid.
It's the wizard who should be afraid of me.
The wizard that there is or was is ever gonna bring me.
Hey, this is Mix Sessions 2024 award season coverage. Jennifer Walden here with the sound team on Wicked. We have production sound mixer Simon Hayes, supervising sound editors Nancy Nugent Title, and supervising sound editors and re-recording mixer John Marquis, and re-recording mixer Andy Nelson. So thank you guys all for joining me to have this chat about the sound of Wicked.
Glad to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So Wicked, of course, started life as a Broadway musical, and the songs are a massive part of the film's soundtrack. You know, getting those songs to sound natural in a film, it doesn't happen by chance. It takes a lot of planning. So can you talk about the collaboration between production sound and post sound and why that's so important on a musical?
I should probably jump in because John Chu came to me and said, look, we are shooting something very big. We're going to have huge sets. We're going to have 3 cameras. We're going to shoot tight and wide. We're also going to have really, really detailed and big choreography. And can we go live? I kind of knew exactly how to get that done, but I wanted to check with Nancy and John about whether my workflow was going to work for them. I've worked with Andy before. Andy and I have been collaborating for quite a while with live vocals. So what I did was I set up a Zoom call with Nancy, and we went through my proposed workflow and how we were going to deal with the background noise, how we were going to deal with the tempo, and when we could leave the tempo and when we really needed to stick to the tempo, and of course how I was going to use microphones. So that happened about 4 months before we started shooting. Was that first phone call, that first Zoom meeting between me and Nancy.
Yeah, that was 2 years ago.
Yeah, it was 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And, and I think we ended up talking for like an hour about it. And Nancy suggested a couple of things for my workflow. I explained a couple of things about my workflow, which may have been slightly unique. Like I use some specific gun microphones, which process background noise. And we just basically got all of our ducks in a line and worked out how we were all going to make our workflows combine as one for the best soundtrack for Wicked.
And the post sound team, like how did that help having this communication with the production sound side?
It was absolutely crucial. Simon sent his first sound rolls as a test, like early in production, so we could be prepared for, the massive coverage he was going to supply us with, all the discrete microphones. And so we could set up our template that way. We knew what we were going to have to dig through and all, and that much coverage, that many microphones on every shot was wonderful. It was like searching for buried treasure sometimes. Even if there was playback on set, we could sift through every single actor's multiple mics and a lot of mics, and a lot of time find those little nuggets of reactions and responses and clean them up in a way that we could, use as much live, not just the live singing, but the live just reactions and presence in as many pieces as possible.
Yeah, and in regards to the live aspect of it, it kind of just ratcheted up the I would assume, Simon, you can speak to this on the set, just in regards to having the control and having all the variables covered that maybe you wouldn't always get, knowing that you're going to be able to capture these 2 girls, and this was going to be the primary source for all these songs. Gave us a lot of leverage to make sure that we were getting the absolute best from the set that we could.
What was really important was that John Chu, from the get-go, wanted to go live as much as possible. We also had some pre-records in our back pocket in case someone got a cold or a sore throat or couldn't sing for the whole day. But it became very, very clear that both Cynthia and Ariana have just got so much vocal stamina. They can just, they wanted to go live and they know exactly how to go live without ruining their vocals for 155 shoot days. They just, they were going at 99%, not 100%, which meant that they could sing like that for 10 straight hours a day. Now, having John Chu completely back the process up and having his DP Alice Brooks, who has obviously been with him since they were at film school together, they kind of set the tone and they made it known that they were supporting me and my team and that they wanted us to get live vocals. And you know what? So much is achievable when a director and a DP are completely signed up to the process and really, really want to help sound and music. And we had that in abundance.
Yeah.
So Simon, I mean, you've captured live vocals on so many musicals, right? Like, was there a musical number on this one that just made you sweat maybe a little bit?
What we did on this one, I took every single experience that I've had recording live vocals before, and rather than just sticking to one methodology, we broke the script down track by track, dance move by dance move, and just worked out exactly what was the most appropriate workflow to be able to deliver live solo vocals on each one of these tracks. And we basically, I took little bits of workflows from every movie that I've done and slotted them together into this big recipe for each individual number. Look, of course, Defying Gravity always springs to mind because we've got someone flying through the air, on wires, doing acrobatic stunts, singing, but also we had to have wind firing at her. We developed silent wind tubes. The special effects department, led by Paul Corbold, had about 5 different tube sizes to deliver silent wind. And what that basically means is normally when we're working blue screen on an interior, we get big fans out, and that normally means that we're going to re-record in ADR, whether it's dialogue or singing. What Paul managed to do, because John and Cynthia desperately wanted to shoot it live, was he got his equipment outside the stage and piped in these jets of air. So basically, Nancy was able to get a clean vocal just with a little bit of air moving around it, which is pretty easy to process out, rather than having the mechanical noise of air moving. So we've got wires, we've got air, we've got someone singing when they're doing somersaults. And, it worked out really, really well. I mean, I've got to say, what was fantastic about it was that Cynthia was wearing a hat, and I had a beautifully placed lav mic right in the peak of her hat, which meant that wherever she went, that microphone was literally in a perfect position, whether she was upside down, whether she was flying at high speed. That was a real godsend.
That hat microphone is a big player in the movie,
Yeah.
all through the movie once she receives the hat.
Yeah.
And what about on the post side? Like, what was the most complex musical number for you guys to bring together?
Ooh, well, they all had their own complexity. I mean, interestingly enough, the very opening of the film was very tough to do. Mm-hmm. Nobody Mourns the Wicked, because it's there's a lot of storytelling. I mean, all the songs have story, which is what's so great about them. They're all part of the lyrics are the same as dialogue. They're telling the story. So, but Nobody Mourns the Wicked is a tough one because there's a lot of backstory being told. And even during the show, it's sometimes a little tough to follow what that story is. I think what John so brilliantly did with Myron, the editor, was to really help us to follow that story. From a sound point of view, there was a lot going on visually and sonically. So we kind of had to attack it a couple of different ways until we could find the one that just allowed the audience in, still allowing the dynamics and the power of the song. But the important thing was not to lose track of what actually was being told. So I'd say that was one of our kind of more complex songs, if you like.
We definitely took several broad passes at that before we got it dialed in. I think our first pass, we turned it up to 11. And and Myron and John were like, no, yeah. let's approach this differently. And so we kind of backtracked and reworked. And Yeah, it is. It's just very. It's the first like 10 plus minutes of the film
Yeah,
with
interestingly,
multiple
Yeah.
flashbacks.
Yeah.
there's a lot going on,
It's
but
tricky.
interestingly enough, the opening reel of any movie is often one of the hardest ones to do. We
That's
often
true.
mix a reel and go back to it later. So this wasn't a surprise. It's just so happens that this one was particularly complex.
Mhm.
But I
Yeah.
knew when we got it and we played it, and a couple of people, Mark Platt came in, and people just put their thumbs up. They knew that we'd kind of been able to nail that storytelling, which was so important.
Yeah, it's tricky. It has multiple peaks in it. You know, you've got a couple places where you want to hear it, feel it hit hard. You know, places where it feels like it should hit at 10, but you can't. You know,
Yes.
you've got the effigy, you've got the wicked title card come up. You've got all this stuff that happens that you're like, these are big peaks, and it was the opening of the movie, and you're like, well, we've got a long way to go. So it has to feel like 10, but it cannot be 10. You know, so yeah, it did take a lot of refining.
Very much so.
So the cinematic version of Wicked, of course, is different from the stage production in that you're able to pull the audience into Oz, like into these crowds, into the experience of walking through Emerald City or Munchkin Land. You know, the stories and the songs, they're not just playing out in front of you on a stage. So what did it take to put the audience inside of director John Chu's version of Wicked?
Yeah, I think it stems from those production recordings. It stems from a very real, very clean, precise spine to the whole track. And you know, knowing that we're going to have to build these worlds up to support these characters, but having such a well-defined, solid grounding of the production track allowed for us to really explore aspects dimensionally within just the sound design, of course. But you know, Nancy will attest, and Andy will, in regards to the group and the ensemble, and just the movement through these worlds, because everyone's singing. The world is an instrument. You know, it's like it's not just the footsteps, it's the doors slamming, it's the tonality of the wind. It's all these things that kind of are become musical in nature. And so it was kind of it's a um, an embarrassment of riches kind of deal of like there's such a deep wealth of what you can do with these songs, and then just the world itself, that it was very easy to kind of
Mhm.
get in there and lose yourself to it, and build this the soundscape and the music that is enveloping just by nature of what you're seeing on the screen. It's very easy to sonically kind of dive into that.
I think also, John, that what was interesting was, and I noticed this the other day when I was listening to the soundtrack album, which apparently is doing incredibly well on the charts right now. But it was so interesting to hear some of the songs, the way they had handled them, because, of course, when there's no picture, it's got to be mixed slightly differently. And the use of reverb, for instance, on the vocals, we kept ours. What I tried to do on the mix was allow the vocal to land in the same place as the spoken dialogue, and that doesn't work for a soundtrack album, obviously, but it works in the film because I wanted to feel that we were in this front row of the stage and they were up on stage and we were watching them, and I think that allowed the world to then be all around them, because if you'd done it in a conventional, slightly more reverby style, the world would have disappeared. So this way we could keep the world very vibrant on every single song by treating them as if they were just, whether they were speaking or singing, they were delivering the story to us. And I think that was the intent that we went for.
And it's interesting hearing you guys talk about this, because I instinctively knew that I needed to give you space to build the score and to build the sound effects. And I also knew that I needed to match the vocals that were live with the dialogue. And so what I didn't do on this movie was leave much space around the dialogue. What I was really trying to do was to close mic the dialogue throughout the whole movie for two reasons. One, because the live singing needs to be close mic'd. Singing has to be close mic'd because that's how it sounds best. And what I didn't want to do was to have any kind of transition from dialogue into singing that would bring the audience out of the story. But I also knew as a double whammy that if I could close mic the dialogue, it would really give John and Nancy room to build up those effects. And Andy, you the ability to play those effects and build this world of Oz around this production dialogue.
Mm-hmm. Exactly right. And that's exactly what we did. And you're absolutely right. I mean, the transitions are seamless because your selection of mic choices and what Nancy had done to make sure that those all matched, and Robin Bainton, by the way, who is a phenomenal vocal editor on this, allowed me to just have all this wonderful luxury of knowing things were going to come in and they were going to start working. And it would allow us the time, because obviously at this point I hadn't heard any of the orchestra or anything, and I knew it was going to be big and very wraparound style. And the better I could handle those vocals from day one, the quicker we would get the result we did. And the songs did come together fairly quickly for that reason, because we just went at them knowing this was the approach we were going to make. I think it couldn't have gone any better, to be honest.
And I really love the idea, and John kind of alluded to this, that the world itself in the film is like an instrument. So not only is the music coming from the singers, it's also coming out of the world. So having the environmental sounds, tuned to the music, it just makes it feel so much more cohesive. Like the music is happening naturally from the actresses and all around them.
Mm-hmm. I think it was a big advantage for our team that John Marquis mixed In the Heights with John Chu, his last musical. And so he had already experienced, he knew what John's taste was as far as syncopated sound effects and how tight everything was going to need to be to satisfy, to get his vision onto the screen. So that was something he was working on from day one.
Yeah, and luckily, it was we were really fortunate. We had John Chu. Everyone assembled a really great team. So, to speak to the music side of things, we had Jack Dolman, which is an amazing supervising music editor.
And Catherine Wilson
and Catherine Wilson, yes, as well.
Robin was mentioned.
Providing click tracks from pop to pop and endlessly sending conversations back and forth about what key this should be in, or what are we trying to communicate with this particular interval. It's like we talk about things as mundane things, or even specific things, like we spent time on this train whistle that originally that wasn't going to be a train whistle. Then all of a sudden John wanted, hey, let's put a train whistle in there. And then you start diving into like, well, gee whiz, this interval of the train within the score is like, what's that communicating? It can't just be a third. Maybe it's a fourth. It's like these different types of things are communicating a different emotional state. And so, we tweak on that from time to time.
What was
the weeds.
What was interesting, Jennifer, also was on the final mix itself, there was such a cohesion between everybody, because while John would listen to the click track of something to make sure that the effect was timed perfectly and be tuning it, Myron would also be on the stage with us, and particularly with Nancy, looking to see if there was a way to maybe roll a picture cut slightly by a frame to improve maybe choreography sync, not vocal sync, but something that, because everything had to come together in that way. And I think that was one of the most exciting things, was to see everybody jump onto that, to know that we all had to work together on this final mix to make this thing absolutely sing the way it did. And
we would make requests. Us in the music department would, Myron, if you rolled that shot 2 frames to the left, it might help us out. And he was always open to trying it. And if it worked, it was like, the best idea wins. It was just fully collaborative.
I mean, there was a real sense of cohesion. I certainly felt when we were on the set that there was no difference between the sound and the music team. We were all working absolutely together. Then 4 months before we started shooting, I was already talking to John and Nancy, and I know that there was that same cohesion with the sound and music team through the post process as well. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of like we were all putting our skills together to just make this musical movie. Another thing, talking about click track, I had click track put through all of my dailies so that Myron, the editor, could go in and cut to that click track so that he always, I felt like there was this lifeblood of Wicked, which is the rhythm which runs through the whole show. And I felt it was really important to dedicate one of my production tracks so that Myron could just have this click, so that he knew if he wanted to stray from the click, of course he could, but he knew that at any point during the cutting process, he could go into that click track on one of my isolated tracks and just check that everything was within tempo.
That's so great. I mean, that's such an awesome tool to have. Like, you know that you're always on beat, like having that click track even as you're cutting the film.
Yeah.
And that click track, it feels like it made its way from the Pro Tools session on the set into my dailies, through Myron's Avid, all the way through to the mix stage for you guys. And I think it was awesome. And that click track is, it's similar to that cohesion between sound and music. It kind of felt like we were just working as one unit.
Simon, was that something that you had done on other musical films that you've worked on, or was this the first time you did that?
What I realized on my first musical was that there was a demarcation between the sound and music departments that I couldn't understand. I didn't know why it was there. And from that moment, I tried to put our departments together. And on every musical that I've done since, I've been more successful on that. But on this one, because we had such a great prep time, and because John was very, very clear that he wanted to go live, I managed to get that cohesion absolutely from the start. 4 months before we started shooting, as I've said, we were already working very, very closely with the music department. And in fact, we built a music studio. Did you know that, Jennifer? Have we told you
No,
about that?
I didn't. No, you built a whole music studio?
Yeah, we built a music studio to do all of the pre-records. And, as I say, we pre-recorded because we were going to shoot with a second unit, a VFX unit, and we needed to give tracks to those guys to time their camera moves when they were going and doing cleanups or big wide shots after we'd finished with the main unit. So we did all of these pre-records, but the great thing was we built a full music recording studio at Elstree for Ari and Cynthia, so that we didn't waste their time putting them in a car and driving them an hour and a half into central London. And they could just go, if they had an idea from a choreography rehearsal and they thought, oh, you know what, let's try this, they could literally jump straight out of the choreography rehearsal. In 2.5 minutes, they would be in the music recording studio with Greg Wells trying, something slightly different with a track. And then that would be the kind of the roadmap, if you like, for the way that we would approach the live vocal on the set. So it really was quite a unique process.
Wow, that's insane. I did not know that. I mean, I knew that John Chu built like these huge sets and set pieces. Like he created Emerald City, like he created Munchkinland, but I had no idea that went into recording studio territory as well. That's awesome.
Well, Jennifer, what we actually did, we also built Greg Wells's USA music studio in London, so that he could get off a plane, walk into the studio. His desk was the same, all of his equipment was the same. So literally, there was no corners cut.
He felt right at home.
He felt right at home.
Don't you think, Simon, that I mean, you've done a ton of musicals. I've done plenty of them as well. Don't you think that you learn something on every one, and you realize that if it did this would be better for this? And somehow on this film, for me anyway, I felt everything had come together from everything I had learned. I don't know if you feel the same.
What I feel that we did really, really successfully on this movie was we knew when we had to stick to tempo, but we also gave the actors moments wherever we could, whenever they wanted to stray from that tempo, to give them emotional freedom. I'm Not That Girl, for instance, Cynthia was able to really stray from tempo until we got into the bass line and the drum track, and then we crossed over from live keyboard, which was accompanying her, to get her into tempo. As the whole musicality comes in. But what we gained from that was giving her this complete emotional freedom to act on the first verse of the song, and I think it worked. I think it was such a strong decision by Cynthia and John Chu to not be tied to tempo at that point, but to still be able to cross over onto tempo when we needed to.
Yeah, agreed.
That's a really beautiful moment. As far as her performance, it's really lovely.
So I have time for just one more question here. Now that Wicked is complete, the film is over and it's gone out to the public, what's stuck with you the most about your experience of working on this film? I guess, Simon, let's start with you.
It's about teamwork. It's all about, being with the right team and everyone being there to help each other. And I'm not just talking about the sound and music team. I'm talking about John Chu and his team who, his HODs, a lot of them have been there with him since film school. It's about the way that both Cynthia and Ari just came into this project just so full of passion for it and so prepared to try and make this process work live. And it was just also about having the help from all of the other heads of department on the movie set, from DP to special effects. Even the grips were trying to be as quiet as possible with their camera moves. The special effects guys absolutely didn't want any of their equipment making noise when Cynthia was flying, which is a big deal. It was just kind of like everyone knew that we all had to raise our games and really, really do something special to be able to deliver this amount of live vocal.
And John and Nancy, on the sound editorial side, what has stuck with you the most about working on this film?
Well, we're only halfway through. We get to do it all over again. So that's pretty exciting. The first time, this was my, Andy and Simon and John as well have all worked on musicals before. And this was my first time working on a musical. So I relied heavily on all their expertise. I called everybody I knew that had worked on lots of musicals and just share their knowledge with me. And so that was a little scary at the beginning, but I feel like we have this unique opportunity now that we've gone through this whole process. Now we can really hit the ground running. We've got all the loose ends, all the questions, the templates have been built, and we can jump right into part 2 like a well-oiled machine, hopefully. And and that that never happens, that you get to finish something this scale and then just start right back up again with the same crew, same processes, same chemistry between everyone. It's really going to be fun.
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway for me was this really felt really truly magical between all the departments. Like, I've never worked on a movie where I really felt like, oh, the choreographer came by the stage and he is loving this and we're loving what he's doing, and like, oh my gosh, Alice came by and she's seeing it. And I mean, you really felt a real strength and bond between all these crafts, and it really felt like everyone was empowering everyone else to, and as a result of that, you feel like you want, like, this looks like this. Alice is just killing it. It's got a sound like what we're seeing visually. Everything has to, you're just feeling this great camaraderie of like just everyone bringing their A game. And I keep saying, like, all the departments are firing on all cylinders, and you could just feel the momentum of this movie. And like how Nancy had, and we've worked with John on plenty of other movies, and Myron, now we've worked with him on a couple movies now, and you just kind of feel like John assembling this team, and you can just feel like when we got the when we found out we're doing this movie, and you just know how huge this movie could potentially be, but it didn't feel overwhelming. You felt like, boy, I'm with the best people to do this. Like, if we're going to be able to do this is exactly how we're going to be able to do it. And you just had a real confidence across the board with all the crafts of who John had assembled to realize this. And that was the most incredible thing. And what Nancy's saying, is going to be awesome. We worked out a whole bunch of kinks. It was all learning and growing, and feel really good about it. So part 2 is just going to be onward and upward. Hopefully.
And it should be said that spirit, I think we've all said to each other that this has been such a special experience, just the feeling of camaraderie and cohesion in the crew, and that all starts with John Chu. He sets that that tone for all of us.
What I'm impressed with and really enjoyed was the fact that John and Universal made such a smart decision to make 2 films, because The
Yeah.
dynamics, I've worked on them in the past where there's a lot of songs to get into one film. And this allowed us the time. It allowed, John was able to create real character development in this, which allowed us from the sound point of view to get all sorts of contours and dynamics, which are very hard to do when you do a full stage musical in one film. So I was incredibly grateful to have that opportunity to not only know we were going to do it again, which is very exciting, but just allowed us to make this film as sweeping as we could by having that amount of time to create film number one.
Yeah, not trying to shove all the material into like 1-2 hour film. Yeah, let's space it out, let it breathe. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, really paid off.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining me to talk about Wicked. Best of luck to all of you this award season. And if you're watching this video, make sure to get out and vote. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Jennifer.
Thank you very much.